Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we're going to discuss pesticide safety. There'll be a certain amount of overlap between this video and the previous one on pesticide labeling, but that's okay. It's all very important information that we really want to drive home so that you'll understand it and you'll be prepared to explain it to others. Any pesticide you buy is going to have a signal word on the front label. That could be caution, warning, or danger. Caution means it's mildly toxic, warning, moderately toxic, and then danger, highly toxic. Normally, the only pesticides that would have a danger label on them, a danger signal word, would be ones for restricted use only, so you wouldn't normally encounter them. But if you ever do, be advised that that's a very highly toxic pesticide. On every label, you will find first aid instructions. Of course, these are going to vary depending on the product. Commonly, you might find instructions that if the pesticide has gotten in somebody's mouth or they accidentally swallowed it, to rinse their mouth, drink water or milk if the label instructs, induce vomiting only if the label instructs. If you get the pesticide on your skin, drench with water, remove clothes, wash body with mild soap and water, no ointments unless prescribed. And of course, these different directions are going to vary by the pesticide in question. Some common acronyms that you may encounter. WPS stands for Worker Protection Standard. Normally, you wouldn't be involved with this. This you might see on a pesticide package if it's also used for commercial growing, because workers get special protections from these chemicals. PPE is something very important that stands for Personal Protective Equipment. We mentioned that in the previous video. Those are the different protective things that you need to wear when mixing or applying the pesticide. And then REI stands for Reentry Interval. Those are either the days to harvest if you spray this on some type of food plant, or the days or hours after you spray before somebody can re-enter the area. And of course, it's going to have storage and disposal instructions also associated with that on the label. When we're talking about how hazardous a certain pesticide can be, that's a function of its toxicity, which is how inherently dangerous or toxic it is, and the amount of exposure that you've been exposed to. So toxicity is the inherent ability to cause harm of the product. The exposure, of course, is how much chemical has come in contact with your body. So if you're using a pesticide that's very toxic, but you're very careful and you have all your personal protection equipment on, you do everything correctly, and you're exposed to very small amounts of it, you're pretty safe. But on the other hand, if you're using a product that's not very toxic, fairly safe to use, but somebody goes out there and sprays it, let's say all they're wearing is a pair of shorts and flip-flops, and they're exposed to a lot of it, it could be very dangerous to you. So there's three different types of exposure to pesticides. One of those is acute, which means it's usually an immediate response and very obvious. That's when you've come in contact with a large amount or accidentally ingested a large amount. There's a delayed reaction, which is chronic, usually from repeated doses. Commercial growers can encounter this problem. That's when they use pesticides very frequently, and each time they're only exposed to a small amount. But over time, it starts to cause health problems. And then, of course, an allergic response is when if you just happen to be allergic to that chemical that you're using. So three different ways that you can be exposed to these chemicals. One type is dermal exposure. That's where the chemical enters through your skin. Oral ingestion, which is where you accidentally get some in your mouth or accidentally swallow some. Or respiratory exposure, which is where you breathe in the fumes. Some common symptoms of pesticide poisoning might be blurred vision, diarrhea, dizziness, excessive sweating, fatigue, headache, vomiting, or stomach cramps. Of course, if you've had any kind of exposure to a pesticide, you want to seek medical treatment, and you might want to seek pretty immediate medical treatment, because even relatively safe to use pesticides that you may have access to at a big box store or a lawn and garden center, if incorrectly used, can still be extremely dangerous to people. So if somebody is exposed to a large amount of one of these products, of course you want to use first aid first. There are directions on the label that tells the immediate types of first aid you should and should not use. You want to seek professional medical help, go to a clinic. You always want to take the bottle or the pesticide label along with you because that provides the doctors and the first responders with a lot of important information they need to know. Each one of these chemicals also has what's called a material safety data sheet. This information can be found online, and it has all the important information that would normally be found on the label, plus a whole lot more. It has all the chemical information, all the storage information, information on whether the chemical in question is flammable at all, at what point it's flammable. So it has a lot of really good background information if you're curious to find out more about what you're actually dealing with. So, of course, pesticides should only be used by homeowners as part of an integrated pest management or IPM plan. We've already covered that, so all of you should know exactly what an IPM plan is. You know this involves taking a number of steps to, for starters, try to avoid insect and disease problems, and then try to solve them with the least toxic solutions possible. We're only going to want to use pesticides as a last resort, and even then, even though sometimes we have to resort to pesticides, you want to really target the product that you're using to the exact problem you have, and using them very carefully and only as a last resort. So like we mentioned earlier, an IPM plan includes the combined use of cultural, biorational, biological, and chemical methods for an acceptable economic pest control with minimum effect of non-target organisms and the environment. In that way, you can keep yourself safe, you can keep everybody else on your property safe, whether it's your children or the neighbors or your pets, and you can also keep all your non-target organisms, the toads, the frogs, the snakes, the birds, everything else that lives in your neighborhood safe, and all you're doing is trying to find a worthwhile and effective cure for the one particular insect or disease problem that you're having to deal with. So for a quick review of exactly what you can find on that pesticide label, it's going to have the brand or trade name. This is the name that the company or the manufacturer gave to this specific product. The use classification, they're classified and restricted based on the toxicity, the inherent toxicity or danger of the product, how the pesticide is going to be used, and the effect of the pesticide on the environment. When it comes to personal protective equipment or PPE, there's a lot of different types and it may get a little confusing on certain labels depending on the pesticide that you're using. Everyone is going to require at a minimum closed-toe shoes or boots, long sleeve pants, long sleeve shirt. Some type of eye protection is always recommended just in case a little bit splashes back up in your face when you're mixing it. You don't want to get in your eyes. But a lot of times the labels are going to call for very specific equipment, not just gloves, but gloves made from a certain material. So here are some examples of all the different types of gloves that are on the market right now. These are all different materials. They're all resistant to different chemicals, and some are much thicker or much more protective than others. And then the types of things that you really never want to be using if you're using a pesticide is something that's not going to block chemicals or is going to actually get wet and hold water. So you really never want to use any types of gloves, pants, shirts, any other equipment that might be made of canvas or leather or cotton, because what happens is if those materials get wet, the pesticide will soak through it and then be held up against your skin for a much longer time. So you're going to get much more of a dermal dose of that pesticide. So always avoid canvas, leather, and especially cotton gloves, and use something that's going to have much more resistant to chemicals like the ones listed above here. So thank you. And as always, if you have any further questions about this or anything else in your Master Gardener training, please don't be afraid to ask. You can contact me by email. You can speak up in class. Because remember, if you have a question about something, chances are everybody else is wondering the same thing. So thank you very much.